Hi, I'm Eric, and it is Friday evening, February 27th, 2026. And I'd like to talk about a couple of items that came across my radar, so to speak, but they have to do with disinformation. So I'm calling this How Disinformation, that is lying to the public, works. Three examples: a congressman, AI, and historical narratives. So let's get started. First of all, I occasionally have I get emails from my local congressperson in California, and he's talking about fixing the roads or doing what are the little projects there are, or talking about the healthcare system, which I think is ridiculous. If he was serious about healthcare, he'd be pushing for single payer healthcare, but that's another topic for another time. So I wrote him about the situation in Venezuela, and he graciously responded to me. So I'm responding to his response here. So this is the text of Congressman Kiley, his email to me about the blatantly illegal actions. Now that's my terminology. The actions of the U.S. government with my comments in brackets. They'll be posted with this. He says, "Thank you for contacting me regarding Operation Absolute Resolve. Yes, America is back. I appreciate you reaching out to me, and it's an honor to represent you in California's 3rd District in Congress." Well, I just checked on who his major donors are. And it turns out Google is his major donor. Granted, I didn't pay him anything, so I'm not sure if he's really representing me, but that's another story. Anyway, he says, "As you may be aware, in the early hours of January 3rd, 2026, the United States conducted an operation that resulted in the capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores. Both are now in custody in the Southern District of New York and face long-standing federal charges." My comment: this was a kidnapping in an act of war against Venezuela, not authorized by Congress and certainly in violation of international law, and it's an impeachable offense. So you can say what you want about it's a legitimate situation, but not according to international law or U.S. law. It was never authorized. Then he goes on to say, "Recently, I had a conversation on CNN to discuss the situation in Venezuela. The United States, Venezuela, and this is really great, the United States, Venezuela, and the entire Western Hemisphere and international order are immensely better off with Nicolas Maduro removed from power." Has he conducted a poll in Venezuela to ask their opinion about this? This was not my comment. This was not authorized by the UN Security Council, so it is an international crime against that country. Lots of countries can accuse U.S. presidents of starting wars, assassinating leaders, staging coups. So should some country just take out Trump and hold trial for him, and everybody's going to say the world is better off because Trump is now in custody? He goes on, "This marks the end of Maduro's illegitimate rule and narco-terrorist reign." My comment: he was elected in a fair election witnessed by international observers. So don't say it was illegitimate. That is not true. It's a blatant lie, in fact. As for narco-terrorism, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency says that Venezuela has a minor role in drug trafficking. So narco-terrorism is a lie. And then he says, "in the beginning of a legal process." It's not a legal process. It's a kangaroo court. They kidnap the guy and they nab him on trumped up charges. No pun there. It is also a chance. This is for the congressperson. It is also a chance at any new beginning for the people of Venezuela. Yeah, under a U.S. dictatorship, they've now turned into a colony. One where dictatorship Well, no, it was a legitimate government that was elected by its people. Socialism, well, it's partly socialism and partly mixed. It has a mixed economy, actually, so it's not pure socialism. And poverty, yeah, poverty because the U.S. has had sanctions on them for decades. So Venezuela saw its oil profits stolen by U.S. corporations under very unfair revenue sharing deals. Plus, it's been under relentless U.S. sanctions, assassination attempts, making the betterment of the people very difficult. Food, medicine, and other essentials have been blocked for years. Mike, that's my comment. And then he says, and replaced by democracy, freedom, and prosperity. Yeah, right. My comment. Quite the opposite. Marco Rubio stated it clearly. It is making Venezuela a colony. Neither democracy, freedom, or prosperity will result. And here's this congressman telling me it's all about freedom and democracy. He goes on, the role of the United States in helping usher in that future must integrally involve Congress moving forward. My comment. This is blatant gangster interference in a sovereign country's affair, period. And Congress should have passed an authorization to use military force, which is exactly what happened. They sent in the military to take Maduro out, and Congress didn't do anything about it. And now he's cheerleading for them. So he continues, once again, thank you for reaching out, and please don't hesitate to contact me on this or any other topic in the weeks ahead. I value your thoughts. My comment, but not as much as not as much as his wealthy donors. And please, and believe the respectful exchange of ideas is the lifeblood of our representative republic. Well, it's very nice to be. He is respectful in this reply, but his attitude of telling me lies that I'm supposed to believe, I don't believe that is being respectful at all. He says, I also invite you to visit my website to sign up to receive updates from me and follow me on Facebook and Twitter. So my comment on this, the U.S. has got control of Venezuela's oil, sells it on the open market as if it's owned by the United States, and Trump says Venezuela is now his friend. This is just blatant colonialism and imperialism. And Trump is so condescending to call Venezuela his friend. It's unbelievable. Okay, the next topic is regarding the post-Soviet education system. So I recently have wondered why many young Russians I have met have such disdain for the Soviet Union. A query on Perplexity AI says that young Soviet students were indoctrinated with Marxist ideology, but now they are taught according to non-ideological principles, just facts about Soviet history, which is damning of the Soviet Union according to their history. So I asked, what facts, whose facts? And he cites two particular sources. Facts is determined by its research, citing such sources as Reddit and the Atlantic Council. Well, Reddit is just a social media website where people can say whatever they want. You can take anything you want and say, oh, this is my source, Reddit. It's just hearsay that would have standing in court. And then he says the Atlantic Council. Now, the Atlantic Council is an American think tank, so it must be factual, right? So he goes on and he says, post-1901 reforms removed mandatory Marxist-Leninist indoctrination, replacing it with curricula that openly critiqued Soviet history, including Stalinist repressions, economic stagnation, and shortages, without glorifying the USSR as flawless. This created a generational break. Unlike their parents' Soviet schooling, which emphasized heroic narratives, like defeating the Nazis, nothing heroic about that, practically single-handedly. Young people learned factual accounts of gulags, The United States prison system is just as big as the Soviet prison system was. Famines, that's true. There were famines, and throughout the Russian history, and finally in the course of collectivization, they finally managed to automate the farming, make it more efficient, and that was when famines finally ended. And now, of course, now Russia is a massive grain exporter. And censorship. Well, I think we've seen what happens with the U.S. Media and censorship and disinformation to question whether there's any parity between the Soviet system and the United States system. But in any case, he says it fostered aversion to that system's controls. So it continues. It says, today's youth see echoes of Soviet rigidity in Putin's regime. That's true. They see rigidity in Putin's regime. Although, oddly enough, Lavada, I think it's called, is a big polling firm that's financed by the West, actually puts Putin's popularity at over 80%. So, does Trump have his popularity is over 80%? No, but Trump has made America great. So he talks about restricted speech, corruption. I mean, like the $32 billion, that's $21 trillion that's missing from U.S. Department of Defense. No corruption here in the United States. Oh, it's all in Russia. Mobilization fears. That's true. They are concerned about being mobilized. A lot of people. The reason why many of the Russians that I meet are here is because they don't want to be mobilized for this war that was foisted upon Russia by the West, which they don't understand even the background of what the Ukraine war is about. I've gone into that in other videos. But I can understand, why we'd want to be in combat. But I believe that the people who are in combat are the ones who actually volunteer. In economic woes, well, Russia's economy expanded by 4%. Granted, there are issues with the Russian economy, and so it's not like it doesn't have problems. But to single out Russia as having big economic problems when the West does not have big economic problems, you see how skewed and hypocritical the reporting is on this. So he says this was amplified by internet access to uncensored views, unlike state TV for elders. This is exactly the way it is in the United States. The United States, we've got all kinds of independent media, especially you might be watching this on YouTube or on Substack. So this is independent media, but most people my age are watching CNN on cable TV and being lied to consistently. But he blames Russia, but not the United States for this. But anyway, that is a reason for generational gaps. And he talks about failed Kremlin youth policies and desires for personal freedom over imposed patriotism. Imposed patriotism, what? If you don't wear an American flag in your lapel, you're being unpatriotic. You have to, it's America, USA, USA. So Russia has imposed patriotism, but in the United States, it's not imposed. So I asked, where does Atlantic Council get its funding from? And here's the answer. The Atlantic Council gets its funding from a diverse mix of sources, including significant U.S. government grants, foreign governments, corporations, and private donors. This is from a particular website called Influence Watch. And then it goes on and it says U.S. government funding. Who are the major contributors to the Atlantic Council? The U.S. Department of State, the Department of Defense, the USAID, aka Regime Change Incorporated, the Department of Energy, with grants totaling millions annually, 1.5 to 3 million from 4 agencies in 2021 alone, and 8 million since 2019 per tracking reports. The Pentagon contractors have provided at least $10.2 million since 2019, making it the top recipient among think tanks. This is according to think tank funding tracker.org. And then it goes on and says, foreign governments donated nearly 21 million from 2019 to 2023, topping US think tanks in this category. For example, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, is one of these, oil monarchies. The UK Foreign Office, famous for its disinformation campaigns. We had to fix the facts around the policy. That's how they got us into the Iraq War. Private donors over 1 million, including Facebook, Goldman Sachs, Rockefeller Foundation, and individuals like Adrian Arsht and Bahai Hariri. The revenue grew from 30 million in 2016 to 70 million in 2022. So it more than doubled in 6 years. I'd like to get that kind of return on my investments. I don't know about you. That was from the Atlantic Council's Wikipedia page. So my comment now. In other words, the entire Russophobic narrative is driven by agenda-driven big money funders. That's how Russians, not to mention the West, get their so-called facts. The curriculum is clearly not fact-driven, but ideologically driven. Russophobia being the ideology. So this is how, and this is an AI, engine that's giving me these answers. And I had to ask them. They say, "Oh, it's true because Atlantic Council said it or Reddit said it." And I say, "Well, are they biased or not? And if they're biased, why are you using them as a source?" So you see, even AI has things skewed in a way that doesn't serve people. You have to be extremely critical in your thinking and know your history to know these kinds of things, because the average person will think, "Oh, the Atlantic Council, it's a think tank. Okay, fine." But because I do my own research, I know what Atlantic Council is like. That's why I ask them the question. Then they answer it, they don't say, "Gee, Eric, we probably shouldn't have used the Atlantic Council, but maybe the reason why the kids in Russia hate their country is because we brainwashed them to hate their country. That's why." So now I'm going to go to two independent voices. One is a friend of mine living in St. Petersburg, Russia. And he grew up in the Soviet Union. He's in my age range. And he is also, he was kind of a dissident during those times, but he keeps critical thinking. So I won't mention his name, because, he wants to be, private. And so I respect that. So you can take what I'm about to write, to state here for what it's worth. I asked him about the large number of young people who have left Russia recently. Many men left to avoid the military draft. Now, he was also critical of the USSR and sought reforms. However, he says Russia nowadays has its own problems. So this is what he says about these young people. "Such people are hopeless, and any attempts to convince them is a sheer waste of time. They listen only to what confirms their picture of the world. Just study them as animals and trace the origin of their views, like the Atlantic Council. They also need the arguments that justify their decision to leave the country. To some degree, I understand them, because the current regime is not a loving mother, but rather a selfish foster mother. But that doesn't justify their own selfishness and lack of mind. And surely," this is him again concluding, "and surely the post-Soviet education system crippled them mentally." So Perplexity AI is saying that the people who grew up in the Soviet education system, who knew very well what capitalism was all about, and saw capitalism destroy their country in the 1990s, and saw their country betrayed by traitors within, they know what went on, but they're considered to be brainwashed. And the kids who have gotten this Western education, this Western indoctrination, oh, they've got the facts right. So you see, this is how it works. This is how disinformation is so pernicious. Okay, now the next one is Professor Grover Four, who has written several books based on his own original research from Soviet archives. They prove that many of the charges against the Soviet Union were lies of opportunistic leaders like Khrushchev and Gorbachev. They wanted the praise of their Western idols and sacrificed their own country to do so. And they wanted to privatize and enrich themselves and their cronies at the expense of the Russian people, which is ongoing. He goes on to say, the Russian government is strongly anti-Soviet. Perhaps just as important is the fact that the Russian intelligentsia was, on the whole, strongly anti-Soviet during the existence of the USSR, and especially after Khrushchev's quote-unquote secret speech. It's hard to exaggerate the catastrophic effect of that secret speech. This was a speech that Khrushchev gave in 1956, in which he harshly criticized Stalin for a variety of crimes. And subsequent research has shown, that, according to Grover Four, having actually gone into the Soviet archives, has shown that many of these statements were just plain fabrications. And some of the great, he talks about this, Khrushchev patronized the dissident movement and made Solzhenitsyn into a major figure. And of course, he turned away from internationalism and the working class. Now, in terms of Solzhenitsyn, he was a poster child for the anti-Soviet movement in Russia, and then he was kicked out of the Soviet Union, and he came to the United States. But then he basically he's a genetic gadfly, and he made a lot of enemies. I guess you could, I don't know about enemies, but he took up residence, I think, in Vermont, but he didn't make any friends here because he was very critical about things here. But in any case, it's been shown that some of his novels were basically fiction. His wife admitted that they were fiction. So, but they take this as truth, and they make up stories out of whole cloth. There were many other propagandists like Robert Conquest or Timothy Snyder, who made outrageous charges against the Soviet Union, and Grover Four has gone out of his way to debunk those by going into the Soviet archives and proving that they were basically writing fiction. And it's so pernicious because they created this enemy out of the Soviet Union that really, they just wanted to get along. They kept talking about peaceful coexistence and mutual security. That's what the Russians and the Soviet Union always wanted, and we just wouldn't allow that to happen. So then came Gorbachev and Yakovlev, who were, Gorbachev was, of course, the general secretary in the Soviet Union, the last one, and Yakovlev was his assistant. And he said, again, I'm talking about, this is Grover Four, quoting from Grover Four. They were in reality strongly anti-communist. And you can read my remarks about them on my webpage if you care to do so. I went to the webpage and I saw, what he has to say about them. And they just had this ideological grudge against the Soviet Union. And likewise, Khrushchev, I read that the reason why Khrushchev turned against Stalin was because Khrushchev's son was involved in a murder, and he appealed to Stalin to rescind a death sentence, which was, if you kill somebody, according to Soviet law, you got the death penalty. Happens here. Stalin said, look, I'm sorry, the law is the law. And because of that, Khrushchev hated Stalin. That's the story, how the story goes. But also during that time, you can see, as Grover Four pointed out, the quote unquote this is my understanding, the nomenclatura, that is the upper level, like the managers of the Soviet companies and so on. They had special privileges, and they had limousines, and they lived in special houses and things like that. And but after they retire, they would have to give those privileges up. So they resented that, and they wanted to end the Soviet Union, and they wanted to grab those assets for themselves. So this is one of the great, crimes against the Russian and Soviet people, that these people in higher levels of authority managed to get control of the assets of the country. Anyway, he says, the real response to all the anti-communism, that's what it is, and anti-Stalinism and the Russians, is this: what is your evidence? And Grover Four has written a number of books proving that many of the claims against the Soviet Union were false. So he finishes off by saying, anti-communism is based on lies, period. There are many people in Russia who see through these lies. Russia still permits communist parties, that's true, and the largest of them is the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Though its politics are not communist at all, it is strongly pro-Stalinist, and so is open to evidence-based research on the Stalin period. So Russia is the only country in the former Soviet bloc, according to Grover Four, where communists are still a large popular force. In fact, Larry Johnson, who's one of the really great commentators these days, former CIA analyst, and now he's a real truth teller, and has gone to Russia several times. He had an interview with Gennady Zhuganov, who is the current leader of the Russian Communist Party of the Russian Federation. I think he's probably close to 80 years old now. He's been the leader for years and years. And so he was given, free, Larry Johnson, had an interview with him. So he says that Russia is the only country in the former Soviet bloc where communists are still a large popular force. And that I can see that. I've met, in my travels to Russia, I have met communists. So communists are basically outlawed, illegal, and in all the other former Soviet bloc countries. So this is my conclusion. We are in deep in a toxic swamp of endless, brazen, imperialist wars, the worst economic inequality in decades, and all covered up with a deluge of bombastic BS, which we saw in Trump's State of the Union speech, and these letters that I get from my congressperson. They simply can't call things by their true names. The article starts out with a letter from an elected government official who blatantly lied to me. And so I ask, where's this going to go is difficult to say. However, we have to remain level-headed and simply state things as they are and not as we would like them to be. So we need to shed our illusions about what kind of system we're living under. It's a system of oligarchy. Russia itself has its problem with oligarchy, but at least it has some degree. It is Russia as a civilizational entity has had a completely different attitude towards what we call imperialism. Yes, it did expand across the Asian continent, across vast expanses of sparsely populated territories, but it has. But the Russian Federation and the Soviet Union had way over 100 different ethnicities. And although they're taught Russian, they also are allowed to keep their native language and their native culture. In the United States, what did we do? We killed them all. The United States, 3% of the population in the United States is Native American, and their numbers are down, drastically because we cut off their food supply by killing all the buffalo. We poisoned them with smallpox-ridden blankets, and deliberately starved them. We caused them to we exiled them in ethnic cleansing, the Trail of Tears of the poor Cherokees. And so, Russia's not blameless in some of these things. It did force people to leave certain areas because of their questionable loyalties, but they didn't participate in these kinds of wholesale slaughters that the U.S. accuses them of. That's the point that I'm making here. And so that's the issue, that the United States and the West has a habit of demonizing its opponents by either picking out the worst aspects of them and magnifying that and not giving them credit for anything. Heaven forbid the United States should say, wow, we are so proud of the Soviet Union that they put the first man in space. That's really great. They've got great scientists. They've got great writers like Tolstoy and Gogol and Chekhov, and poets Lermontov and Pushkin. But we don't do any of that. We don't appreciate any other culture. It's all about America and all about the West. And everybody, as Joseph Borrell said, we're the garden and everything else is outside it is the jungle. It's an extremely skewed and, dare I say, nihilistic point of view that the West really needs to get a grip with. And that's the reason why I'm going on this kind of rant here, to explain that we really have to be on guard for these lies that we're constantly told. So thanks again for listening. Please support my channel. Please give me a like at a minimum, or to make a comment. I'll comment if you make something, state something that I think is worth commenting on your comment, and share it with your friends, share it on other social media, and make a donation either through PayPal or subscribe to my Substack channel, or in whatever way you can. So thanks again for listening, and I will catch you again soon.